Hey there, Professor Fields here. This is AJ 111, Criminal Investigations. We are in Chapter 6. We're talking about interviews and eyewitness identifications. This is the first part of Chapter 6. Let's talk about what an interview is and how it differs from an interrogation. An investigative interview is any kind of questioning where you're trying to find out some information regarding a crime or a person suspected of a crime. This differs from an interrogation. In interrogation, you normally have the person in custody and you're asking them specific questions rather than general questions. And we'll get into the questionings in a later part of this module. And the goal of an investigative interview is to develop information so you can move forward in your investigation. So different types of witnesses. The primary witnesses are people that have a direct knowledge of the crime of the suspect. These are people who actually saw the crime go down or saw something related to the crime, either right before or right after. Say you're sitting on a street corner and you hear tires squealing and you see a guy run off the road. You're a witness to a traffic collision, so you're a primary witness. A secondary witness is somebody who has information about the crime, but it could be information about what happened before the crime or after the crime. So let's go back to that crash I just talked about. Say somebody comes up to you and says, hey, this guy that crashed here, he passed me 2 miles back and he was speeding. So that witness didn't actually see the crash itself, but they heard or they saw the person speed by them. Maybe if the person's intoxicated, somebody else comes along and says, hey, I was with that person at a party down the street. They were drinking alcohol. That shows it's information before or information after the crime. Hey, I saw this guy running down the street. He's covered in blood and glass, and he's around the corner sitting at the bus stop. The person didn't see the crash itself, but saw the person that's likely involved somehow in this traffic collision. They could be a passenger, they could be the driver. We don't know yet. You have to go around and question that person. They're also really good at identifying, hopefully really good at identifying the person who did the crime. Now, witnesses have filters like most human beings have filters. And we'll talk about that more in depth later on. But in my experience as an investigator, people that have certain expertise see certain things. Like I found that females can be very good at describing clothing on people because a lot of females are into fashion and fashion design, and they can tell you what kind of purse maybe a lady had or what kind of shoes somebody had. Teenage males might be able to tell you what kind of bicycle the person had, if they're into bicycles or skateboards, or even a type of car. Somebody might say it was a red car, and another person might say, I'm a car guy. That's a Mustang 5.0. Witnesses can provide information for a composite picture. That's a sketch of your suspect. And in the next section, I have a video about the computer program called Faces, which uses computers to develop that sketch. But there's also sketch artists. We have police artists that are trained in drawing a picture of a suspect based on the memory of a witness. There's also mugshot books. In the old days, they were actually books that were sitting on the shelf in your police station. Maybe your station still have those. We've gone now to computerized mugshot books. We'll have a computer program with all the mugshots in there. And maybe you've heard the saying, let's round up the usual suspects. If you're looking for sex offenders, if you're looking for somebody that did a sex offense, and there are several sex offenders in your area that you're looking at, that might be a really good place to start as an investigator. That's what we call a clue. Then we have a show-up identification, and that's a field show-up. That's where you chase a guy down the street, you catch him, and you're holding him. You can have the witness come to you and identify the person as being the suspect or not the suspect. Case law says you cannot bring the person you've apprehended back to where the witness is, because that tends to influence their decision on whether or not they're guilty. So remember, you got to always bring, and we'll talk about case law later on, you always have to bring the person back, or the witness back to wherever you've got the suspect detained. Other methods, photo lineups. DMV in California, we have a DMV program that makes up the photo lineup for you. You put in your suspect's information. If you have a suspect's photo, maybe you have his or her driver's license, and it'll come up with 5 similars. So you have the suspect and 5 similars. There's some case law on exactly what you have to read to your witness. We're going to go over that later on. And you got to make sure that you follow the rules when it comes to these photo lineups. Like you couldn't have, say that in the picture here, you've got 6 African American females. You couldn't have 1 white female and 5 African American females, and your suspect's a white female. You'd have to have similar looking. Now, they'd have to be exact, but similar. And there's also a live lineup or a physical lineup. Those are normally done at the station when somebody's in custody. You want to find individuals that look very similar to the suspect. I have never used one of those in person. I have seen them though. I've seen detectives use those, and I've actually seen it where they needed somebody to look like somebody, and they'd be actually using another police officer in the field lineup. All right, that's it for this section. We'll go on to the next section.